But I now call upon Tim Dawson, President of the National Union of Journalists. Tim has been on the National Executive Council of the AUJ for the last 20 years, so he's a veteran.
Thank you very much. It's very good of you to invite me. It's great to see so many people here. I'm not going to try and lecture you about the situation in India, because I think a lot of you will know more about that than I do by some margin. But let me share with you, I suppose, about the perception of it, I think, from this country. Looking at, there have been shocking killings of journalists in India, really for the past decade. According to the International Federation of Journalists, 173 murdered since 2005. Looking at the kind of mob treatment of journalists, of dissenters, of members of minority religions, of people from disputed areas of India. I mean, what it looks like to me, actually, is the way that the Ku Klux Klan were in the southern states of the United States in the, from the 1930s onwards. A kind of blind eye being turned from the top to mob violence used to enforce an ideology that was shared by some explicitly in the mob and by others perhaps less explicitly but more dangerously from the very top. And it seems to me that the Modi government's unwillingness to confront this mob violence, this apparent licensing of mob violence, does represent an incredibly dangerous turn for India, and one that really risks it turning from being a democratic light in the post-colonial world to one which is taking a deeply disturbing turn. My interest, I guess, is predominantly in the protection of journalists, and I don't say that because journalists are more or less important really than any other humans. But I guess my role is particularly about journalists, and if there is a greater importance to the work of journalists, it's that they have some capacity to shine light on these kinds of appalling malpractices and to share them with the world, in the hope, I guess, that calls to account the people who are licensing this kind of behaviour. So while, as it happens, my sister unions in India, I know, would like to see special laws brought in to end impunity for journalists. To be absolutely honest, I don't think we need special legal protections for journalists. We simply need to see the rule of law observed, and we need to see the rule, where shocking killings and beatings occur. We need to be, they need to be examined and to prosecuted, and the perpetrators called to account and prosecuted where that's appropriate. And I guess it kind of begs the question, well, how are we going to make that happen? Because, it must feel, it must be impossibly difficult if you're in India and you're subject to these attacks, but, at a dramatic geographic distance as we all are, I think that's, it's a different kind of helplessness that we feel, perhaps, but it's easy to feel helpless. And it seems to me that the only way really to start to bring India to account is to make sure that as many people as possible know what's going on, to make sure that there are lots more meetings of this kind, that all the techniques of social media and of promoting these shocking stories to a wider audience. And I think actually British journalists have a job of work to do. It shames me sometimes that the British journalists can be a little bit insular and, apparently more concerned about what their colleagues on the next desk or on the next paper are doing than what's happening to their profession around the world. Because, assuredly, if we step up to the plate and say it is not acceptable to treat journalists in India in this way, it's my hope and expectation that if there were ever a time when journalists in Britain were facing that kind of threat, that journalists in India and all over the world would also stand up and say, you know what, people stood by us when our backs were against the wall, and we'll stand by them again. And it's really only by journalists all acting together around the world and accepting that we are the best people to protect journalists, with those who support and are interested in the information that we produce, and say to our government, if you're having dealings with Modi, then insisting that human rights should be a part of that conversation is an absolute starting point. Otherwise, dealing with a regime of that kind without making human rights an absolute centrepiece of any discussions with them is to make the British state complicit with this. So I would really encourage you in your works. I will do everything that I can within my union to make sure that your work is known of and to publicise these cases. And hopefully, if we all keep doing that, a point will come when it becomes obvious to people in India that putting up with such an appalling regime is simply not acceptable, and that they will turf him out of power, and that India will be a better place, and that journalism in India will thrive as it has done for many decades again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I mean, I appreciate your comments about, because the thing is, the kind of staple diet of a lot of British journalists effort on India is to produce a lot of stuff based on, romanticizing colonial India and then longing for this, this nostalgic trip down, what India was then. And this is what we see on our television screens and newspapers sometimes, too often, and not enough about what's going on there, unfortunately. So that's something we have to remember. And I just wanted to mention, which I had forgotten to say, that I think it is a Committee to Protect Journalists index has seen India slide down to 136th place in that index for journalist freedom, security, amongst 180 countries, which is very low indeed.
I was just going to say the point that journalists here have had problems trying to expose the links here with the support for Hindutva forces.
Okay.
So,
it's
also quite important.
And according to the Reporters Without Borders, India is, quotes, Asia's deadliest country for media personnel, ahead of both Pakistan and Afghanistan. So that is pretty damning indeed. And